Welcome back to Great Life, Great Career. Here's your host, Scott Miller.
Okay, man, rock and roll. Let's get started. We have in the studio today General Christine Burckle, the commander of the Utah Air National Guard. As I mentioned, one of the few female generals in our military. Take her gender aside, one of the few generals in our military that we want to just express everyone's appreciation, honor, respect, gratitude, that you have dedicated your life to the safety of this country and to our allies. I want to thank all of our service members in your presence for your contribution. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope that you take my sincere admiration and gratitude to represent the 300 plus million Americans for all of your service. Take that genuine and know that we have your back because you have ours. Welcome to On Leadership.
Thank you, Scott, and it is actually an honor to be here talking to you today.
So could not be more excited to listen to you. I'd like to start today and kind of level set. What is it like to become a general in the U.S. military? Walk us through your your history, and talk about the process of earning the status, the right, the respect, the command of becoming a general.
So I started, I was born in a very small town in Midwest Ohio, and my parents were both farmers, grew up on farms. Yeah. My mom was from a family of 9, my dad a family of 6. My dad's job, he was the first in his family to go to college. My dad's job eventually took us to the East Coast, to Connecticut. Yep. And I grew
farming in Connecticut?
No. Well, no, he worked for General Telephone Electronic back when that was a company.
Yeah.
But he moved us all back east, and we became city kids. And I grew up in Connecticut. No one in my family really had a military background or was in the military. So in high school, actually, probably about the age of 12, I got the flying bug. Mm-hmm. It's funny. My older brother takes credit for my entire career because he was supposed to get to go flying with my dad in a friend's plane, a small plane. He had an earache that morning, so I got to go instead, and I got in the air, and that's all it took.
Isn't it amazing some of the most serendipitous opportunities? One door closes, another opens, and look at you now.
So I really, really wanted to fly, and in high school, my guidance counselor knew that, and he said, best way to fly is join the Air Force. So I applied for the Air Force ROTC scholarship, got a 4-year scholarship, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, was commissioned in 1988, and I thought I was going to be a pilot, but my eyesight didn't hold up, so they offered to send me to be a navigator.
And the difference is?
So the pilots fly the plane, and the navigators tell them where to go. So I went off to California, became a navigator, graduated from nav training, and went to fly the KC-135 air refueling plane, and it's all kind of history since then. Yeah. In 2005, they actually replaced me with a computer, believe it or not. You could probably count on me to get you within 3 miles in the air, and those darn GPSs could do better than that. So ended up going over to personnel and human resources, and my journey to becoming a general is kind of funny because I think what it really was for me, I never wanted to be a general. I never dreamed of really being a general. But professional development, you're always taught as an officer to prepare yourself for additional responsibility in that next level. And when General Burton, the Adjutant General of the Utah National Guard, asked me to take this position, it just kind of seemed like a next natural step for me as a leader to be prepared to do that. So 3 years ago in 2016, I pinned on this star, became the commander of the Utah National Guard, and it has just been an awesome ride since then.
General, take our audience to the moment when you became a general. Think back to that. Can you recreate what that was like for anyone becoming a general, but for you specifically? What was that moment like? What changed in you, if anything?
So there's actually a formal ceremony. Imagine that in the military, a ceremony where you are promoted and your family comes up, and it's very emotional because you know that you can't do what you do in the military without the support of your family. So traditionally, it's your family that pins on your rank. So you have the order from the President of the United States read out loud, and there's my husband and my daughter pinning on my rank. And then the next thing that happened was the formal ceremony to take command. And it goes back to Roman times where you get a guidon handed to you and you assume command, and it's a very serious ceremony. And I think at that moment in time, it hit me, the responsibility of that command and that position of the 1,400 airmen in the Utah Air National Guard. So Governor Herbert was there. He's a commander-in-chief of the Utah Air National Guard along with the president when that mission dictates. And my boss, General Burton, handed me that guidon, and I said, "Sir, I assume command." And at that point in time, I went, "Okay, wow, what now?" So, but
Wow.
we're trained and prepared as leaders to take on that responsibility.
It's emotional for me just listening to the story. Talk about what it's like to be a female general in the U.S. military. There aren't but a couple of dozen at any given time and right now. And is it any different? Does your gender come into play at all? You shared a great story off the air around when you talked with your general around how you assumed that the fact that your gender didn't play a role. Talk about the paradox of that.
So, I mean, it's back to the beginning of my career. I was the only woman in my class of 50 at Nav School. So I was used to being kind of the anomaly, one of very few women. But I've always felt like my airmen have been there as teammates for me. And it didn't matter what gender you were, as long as you put on the uniform like they did and did the job. So I've kind of never really felt singled out as a woman. And my boss, General Burton, has always told me, you were not selected for this position because you're a woman. You were selected because you were prepared. And I trust you. I have confidence in you that you can do the job. And I feel like in the military, that's something, it doesn't matter your background, your color, your race, your creed. If you've prepared yourself for that level of responsibility, you're ready. So,
General, you have a fascinating background. You served 8 years in the Air Force, and then you stepped away and became a private citizen and entrepreneur.
yes.
And you immediately kind of rejoined the Air National Guard. Talk about the transition from military life to civilian life as an entrepreneur and some of the lessons that were immediately replicable. Because you might not always think they are, but you said it's ironic how replicable some of the entrepreneurial skills are.
Well, that's true. I actually owed the Air Force 6 years for them paying for my college. I stayed 8. And then my last base was Mountain Home Air Force Base, Idaho. And I decided at that point when my commitment to the active component was up that I wanted to own my own business. It had always been a dream of mine. So I opened an espresso bar at Fashion Place Mall in 1997, but I also kept my military career going as a traditional or a drill status guardsman, the 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. This was back before 9/11 and things really changed in the military. So owned my small business and still flew the KC-135 on weekends and part-time. But that small business, that little kiosk, I felt like most of my employees were high school employees, high school kids. And they looked to me to provide high standards and leadership. And I still am in contact with some of them today. And they felt very much like that put them on a path to success, to have a small business owner who took that military experience and translated it to the pride they could have in doing a good job, the pride they could have in knowing that they did the right thing when no one was there. When the supervisor wasn't there and, you've got an 18-year-old, a lot of things could happen, but they really, I think, embraced my military background and respected it enough. And I used my leadership skills to make sure that I kind of led that little kiosk just like I was flying my crew, flying my mission in the military. So,
and you loved that business. You shared prior to going on air that something happened during your kind of the peak of business that really changed your trajectory professionally and personally. Talk about what happened next.
So I think we all know what happened when 9/11 hit. And so I opened the business in 97, got through a couple of deployments when the Kosovo conflict arose, and actually got married during that time frame and spent my honeymoon with my husband, who is also a pilot for the Utah National Guard. And well, he was a pilot, I was a navigator. We deployed during the Kosovo conflict. The business went on, but then when 9/11 hit, my brother, who managed the business for me, said, I don't see there being an end to this deployment cycle. So I sold the business, and it was devastating to me because I loved that. It was like my child. It was a great business, great opportunity here in Utah, very supported at the mall by folks, especially who knew I was in the military. And so I sold the business and packed my bags to deploy, for the Afghanistan kickoff conflict, and wasn't feeling well. And the next thing I knew, I wasn't deploying because I found out I was pregnant. So my husband deployed. I stayed home, and I'm actually kind of thankful that I sold that business because I will tell you that I think it got even more difficult. It would have been even more difficult to have a child and a business at the same time.
Right.
But things happen for a reason. So
We're talking today with General Christine Burckle, the commander of the Utah Air National Guard. Talk a bit about what are some misconceptions that the average civilian has about what it's like for women in the military. You obviously are an example of someone who's risen to the top, near to the top. What's it like? Is it different now than it was, say, 20 years ago? What's changed?
It is different now, I think, mainly because we've worked very hard at what I believe, and especially when you're at war, for as long as we've been at war, you work very hard at making sure that you build a team of people who are inclusive. You build a team of people who you get to know before you have to go to war. And I think before we were challenged with as much conflict as we have, maybe we didn't value as much the differences in all of us of who we are and understand how important it is for us to navigate those waters of having those difficult discussions about if you're, a woman. Women are different than men. We communicate different. Lots of different experiences I've had in that realm. As a matter of fact, one I'll share with you. Back in the early days of my career, flying in the Middle East in the 90s and flying on crew, I was the only woman refueling some foreign fighters. And the job of the navigator is to conduct what's called a rendezvous. And so I was supposed to tell that fighter lead, how to approach our refueling aircraft. And I thought we were having radio transmission issues. So I had the pilot radio check him, had the boom radio check him, and radio check good. So I keep trying to radio check, and I quickly figured out, we all did, that his radio, he wasn't hearing me because I was a woman.
This was a pilot from another country's Air Force.
Yes.
That was refusing to communicate with you.
Yes, in the Middle East, a Middle East. So I was flustered and my blood started to boil, and instead of allowing the mission to continue and them just kind of blow past me, my pilot actually told that fighter lead, you're going to answer to her calls or you're not going to get your precious gas. And I just feel like at that moment,
that's a life or death decision.
It was pretty important that he stood his ground, but it actually told me that we're doing things right in the U.S. military, and the fact that he demanded respect of his airmen. He demanded respect of his person on his crew. And I think we have shown around the world that we are an Air Force built and a military built on respect. We're built on, we know that we're stronger together. So I think that's just a theme that in my military career has gotten stronger and stronger. And I would have to say another example is we lived too long under the don't ask, don't tell policy. We all knew that we had LGBT crew members and airmen in our squadrons and units. And to be honest with you, it was don't ask, don't tell, don't care. As long as you do your job, you put your uniform on like we put our uniforms on and do the job. But finally, when that policy went away, there was still an issue with people feeling like they could serve openly. But I feel like that's really no longer the case. I think we've finally proven and shown the respect for who we are as airmen and what we have for each other. So,
Pat, you have a great story about that. You have a colleague, Brian Garrett, that talked to you about his own LGBT inclusion. Talk about that story and how that should, I think, inspire Americans on the progressive nature of the military as it relates to valuing, including, honoring everyone who wants to serve.
So Brian Garrett, who's also a traditional guardsman, he is also a senior vice president at Zions Bank. He was a former reservist serving under the don't ask, don't tell policy. He married, he had children, and he then came to the Utah National Guard. He made Chief Master Sergeant, and he applied for the job to be the head enlisted advisor to me as the commander. I selected him best person for the job, absolutely best person for our airmen. But he was hesitant to accept until he told me of his life journey, finally getting to a place in his life where he was tired of not being who he was. So he came out, and he's actually marrying his partner this summer. But he came out and he said, "Are you sure the Utah Air National Guard is ready for a gay command chief?" And I said, "Ready or not, here we come." we're their leadership team, and we're going to make sure that we represent all of our airmen and that we show them that we respect each other and we expect them to respect us as leaders and as a leadership team. And I feel like this last 3 years, he and I have really been on a quest to make sure that everyone in our organization knows how we feel, how important it is to be able to live your life and be respected for your background and who you are and be valued.
General, do you feel that your perspective, your leadership style, the principles that govern your leadership influence are the same across the military? Because I'm having a little bit difficulty believing that other generals would have handled that same conversation the same way. It seems like that was the ideal conversation.
So I can't speak for everyone, but I can say if you look at like the U.S. Air Force Academy, and they recently had some issues with some discrimination coming out, racism coming out, and their commander did an amazing speech about how important it is for all of us to respect each other. And if you don't, get out of his military.
Great to hear.
Get out of our military.
Great to hear.
And so I do feel like that's one thing I can say across the board is that as general officers and leaders in this military, we demand that our airmen, our soldiers, our Marines not only know their job in and out and be able to do their job and have high standards, but that they respect each other, because you cannot accomplish what we accomplish as teams unless you have the utmost of loyalty and respect, and that you demand it and expect it from others.
Our guest today is General Christine Burckle, commander of the Utah Air National Guard, sharing us her story, her journey as one of the few female leaders across the entire U.S. military. When we come back, I want to dive a bit deeper on her own experience and her own philosophy around the top challenges to diversity and inclusion in the military and how those principles, those challenges can inspire everyone in a leadership position outside of the military, in your family, in your communities, in your jobs, how each of us can be beacons of hope, models of progressiveness to make sure that everyone feels included and valued. You're listening to Scott Miller. We'll be back in just a few moments with General Christine Burckle.